Welcome to Sound of Truth. This is episode number 8. And in this episode, we're going to interview my longtime good buddy, Steven Adams. We're also going to talk about one of our favorite movies. I suppose it's one of our favorite movies because we talked some.
It's definitely a great movie.
Fun. It's called Forrest Gump. We're also going to, it's kind of old now, but anyway, it's one of his childhood movies.
For me, it was a childhood movie. For others,
Steven and I, we were already adults.
Your midlife movie.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. It's been around a while. So we're going to talk about Forrest Gump. We're going to talk about Exodus chapters 21 through 30. And then we're going to interview my buddy, Steven Adams. He's going to share his testimony of how he came to Christ and a little bit more than that as well. So before we get started, I do want to introduce Steven because Steven, this is an unusual episode in that we have invited Steven to join us for the whole episode.
So he's on the line right now.
He's on the line right now. So let me give a quick intro for our listeners, our viewers. Steven Adams is my longtime close friend. We met in seminary in Texas when we were both driving a school bus for the same school district while we were at seminary. And we just hit it off, mutual love of sports and different things in our culture and great conversations, mutual love of the Lord and interest in becoming pastors. And as the years went on, we kept in touch after seminary, and our friendship grew and grew. And now we're close. I mean, let's put it this way. In Forrest Gump, he kept referring to Jenny as we were like peas and carrots, you know. And that's kind of like me and Steven. Got our different backgrounds, me being from Southern Illinois and him from Georgia, growing up on a dairy farm. But mutual love for the Lord, great friends. Steven is pastor of Legacy Church now. We both have planted a church, planted Harvest Jacksonville. He recently planted Legacy Church in Harlem, Georgia. And Steve is married to Cheryl, and they have 5 kids, ranging in age from college all the way down to 7 years old. You got Emma and Dougie and Caleb and Asher and Karis. So, Steven, great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to Sound of Truth.
No, thanks. It's great to be here, Brad. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks for giving us your time, and we look forward to a great episode together. As you referred to me one time not too long ago as your brother from another mother, and we really are not just brothers in Christ, but I guess you could say you're the brother I never had, so I love you, bro, and I'm excited to have you on the program. So
great to be here.
All right. Well, hey, that's all a little intro. Let's take a real short break. We'll be back to talk about Forrest Gump. Recently watched the movie Forrest Gump.
We need to make a new movie. Forrest Gump.
Recently watched Forrest Gump with my 18-year-old son. We were out of town together, staying at a hotel, and I saw it was on. I said, we got to watch this movie. So it's a long movie anyway, but then when you got all those commercial breaks, we spent the whole evening in the hotel room watching the movie, and he really enjoyed it. At first, he was kind of suspicious as what is this, you know,
right.
that Dad wants me to watch.
Yeah,
but it didn't take long for him to start enjoying it. It's a great movie from, I think, about 1994 or so, featuring Tom Hanks. And maybe we're definitely going to have some spoilers here because I want us to share our favorite scenes from Forrest Gump, which I forgot what a great movie that is.
It is very good. And again, it's so funny that we need to give the obligatory spoiler alert for a movie that came out in the 90s. Yeah. But we're doing this for your sake, audience.
Well, there's a whole generation of people who haven't seen it, just like my 18-year-old son.
That's right.
And I wanted him to see it when I saw it was on there. I said, we got to watch this movie together. I forgot just how, not just funny and, you know, it's aged well because they go through all those periods of history that doesn't change. You're looking back on the 60s, the 70s, et cetera. So, and all these American history events, et cetera. But, and it was very positive overall. Forrest Gump, it really lives out our Christian values in a lot of ways. So we'll maybe touch on that here.
So we'll keep chit chat to quick.
Keep it short.
So we're gonna keep it short. So we're gonna go through it. I think we're gonna start with Brett since you've watched it so much recently. Then we'll go to me, and then we'll go to Steven. Excuse me, Steven. And we're just gonna go with one of your favorite scenes. So hit us with it.
Just real quickly, 2 of my favorite scenes. There's so many great scenes, so many great quotes, but I'm gonna choose when he goes to play football at the University of Alabama, and because I'm a big football fan, a big sports fan, really love college football. I just found that so cool. and so funny as well. How they would hand him the ball and say, "Run, Forrest, run," which was kind of the ongoing theme,
right.
A repetitive theme through his life. And I ran, so it shows him weaving through, nobody tackling him. He's outrunning everybody. And then he runs right through the end zone all the way
through the band.
Like Bo Jackson did on that Monday Night Football deal when he ran up through the gangway or whatever you call that. Just kept running. Well, Forrest Gump did that. Well, then they show him again. He runs for a touchdown. He's an All-American star running kickoffs. And then they've got band members situated at the end of the end zone telling him to stop, Forrest, stop.
Right.
If you'll notice in the scene, too, back behind there's a big banner that says, "Stop, Forrest, stop."
I never caught that.
It's hilarious.
That is funny.
So it's a great scene. So that was my favorite humorous scene.
I can think of that scene because I remember there's one, the camera pans into his face and he's just like completely oblivious looking at something in the sky. And then the quarterback runs and puts the ball on
the quarterback is the guy who caught the kickoff, hands it to him, and then pushes him, kind of goes, "Run, Forrest, run."
And that's when he's like, "Oh, okay, all right."
Yeah, then he goes running. So it's a great scene, a great section of the movie, especially for sports fans. So the other scene I want to point out, and it's not maybe one that most people will remember, but he's reconnected with with Lieutenant Dan, who was his boss over in Vietnam, over his troop, and he saved Lieutenant Dan's life in Vietnam. But Lieutenant Dan lost his legs and wished he would have died, and he's angry for years. He's angry and bitter at Forrest for saving his life because he wishes he would have died in Vietnam. But there's a scene which they've reconnected. They're in a hotel room in New York City. They go to this bar to celebrate New Year's Eve, and they pick up these two girls, bring them back to the apartment, which is not the best values there, of course, but the girls start trying to make the moves on him and all that. One of the girls is putting the moves on Forrest, and he rejects her. And she says, "Are you stupid or something? What's wrong with you?" And she starts calling him stupid. And Lieutenant Dan, this is a turning point in the relationship, he stands up for his friend Forrest and says, "Don't you call him stupid, then get out of here." And the girls kind of mock them and make fun of them as they're going out the door. And that was a turning point in their relationship to where Forrest Gump's love and acceptance and unconditional love of his friend Lieutenant Dan finally wins Lieutenant Dan over. And now Lieutenant Dan is committed to Forrest Gump for life as a friend as well.
Mm-hmm. And it was kind of the catalyst was nothing that Forrest was doing for him. It was seeing someone wrong Forrest.
And it's hitting him how much he meant to him and how much he had done for him.
Right. And this person who's doing him wrong when Forrest has done nothing wrong to anyone in the entire movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a powerful moment where really it was love winning him over. Mm-hmm. And Forrest Gump never gave up on Lieutenant Dan in spite of how mean he was to him at times and blaming him and angry at him. It's a great part of the movie. So what about you?
There's so many, and I haven't seen the movie for a while, but there's so many scenes that are just rushing through my head, like, oh, do this one, do this, and do this one. So I guess I'll do it real quick, and it's not necessarily one scene, but kind of like as you mentioned, like a theme throughout. The first scene where he is getting the rocks thrown at him as a kid, and he's got the devices, the leg braces on his leg, and Jenny says, "Run, Forrest, run," and it's the slow "Run, Forrest," and it's a really powerful scene because he's hobbling, and now he's getting strength, and now the devices are breaking off of him, and he's running. And I remember as he's narrating his own story, and I was running, and he never stops running. Like, so he's running through this. That boy was a running fool.
Yeah.
So he's growing up doing all this, and then it comes to a part where and I can't remember the catalyst of this part in the movie, but he just runs. As he gets to a certain age, he just goes, "I'm just going to start running throughout the country."
He ran cross country
cross country, has this huge following, and it looks like, and this is the scene that it makes me smile. He got this huge following of people just running, and apparently they find themselves, it looks like they're in the middle of the desert.
They're in Monument Valley.
They're in Monument Valley.
The famous place of John Ford's westerns, me being a western guy. Yeah.
Well, they're in the famous place of who? John Ford's?
John Ford was the director.
Got it.
Of John Wayne's movies that were set in Monument Valley with the rocks that come up out of the ground.
Okay, yeah. So that's silhouette.
Yeah.
Well, he's there. They're all there. It looks like hundreds of people behind him.
20, 30 maybe.
He goes, it just clicks. He just stops. I think I
say something.
Yeah, I can't.
Shh. The people behind him. The guy goes, "Shh." I think he's going to say something. Like he's just this sage.
I can't even remember what it says. It's something like, "I'm tired. I'm going to go home."
Yeah, that's it. As he's walking, they part, and he walks right between them. and one of them says, "What are we going to do now? Where are we going to go?"
And he has that, is it that shirt or something like that? And that's where the shirt with the saying, like the smiley face or
that was earlier in the movie.
I can't remember, but it was so funny, and it's just like he's so simple. There's no guile. Everything, he just lives his life on the sleeve, And this was just one of those moments where he made a decision. I'm going to go home. I'm tired.
That's great, Stephen.
Well, I haven't seen it in a while, so it's not as fresh in my mind. But this part is my favorite, though. It's when he gets on the bus. I think they're headed to like boot camp or something, and he sits down with the guy that will become his best friend, and
Bubba.
So they sit together. Yeah, he introduces himself. Hey, my name is whatever it was, and he said, but people call me Bubba. And then he goes, "Hi, I'm Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump."
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just love that. The other thing is kind of a not a specific quote or anything as much as when we go out to eat seafood. A lot of times, even today, we'll start rattling off the shrimp.
All the thing that you can do with shrimp. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
from
great.
The movie.
Bubba knew his shrimp. I mean, that's all the guy talked about. He was obsessed with shrimp. I actually counted this time. Third time for me to watch the movie. And so when he started rattling off, I was ready for it. And I'm just counting them off. And I if I counted correctly, he listed 22 different kinds of shrimp.
And he could have kept going. And at the end of it, I think that's it. I think that's all you can do with shrimp.
Yeah.
Come on.
Right now, we're going to go ahead and look at Exodus chapters 21 through 30 was our reading assignment for this week as we do our 3-year journey through the Bible here at Harvest Jacksonville, and for anyone else who's joined us via the podcast in this journey through the Bible. So Exodus 21 through 30. Now, I don't know if you remember, but last episode, Rick, you said, I wonder when we're going to get to a point where these 10 chapters that we're covering are not just filled with so many things. What are we going to choose to talk about?
Right.
And I said, oh, don't worry, it's coming. And sure enough, there still could be a lot to talk about, but now we are hitting a section in Scripture. It's really our first one since we started from Genesis 1, where there's just a lot of law.
Right. It's almost, I don't know if this is the correct technical term, but the narrative story is kind of stopping here, and it's more like listing out the do's and don'ts.
Yeah. With the exception of a couple of genealogy chapters in Genesis, it's been pretty action-packed, compelling stories up to this point. And now we're hitting the part where some people, this is the stage in their attempt to read through the Bible where they might start struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And some people find these laws interesting. I hate to refer to a section of God's Word as in this terminology, but we're just being honest before God. This section's not as bad, it's not as much of a struggle as when we get to the begats, the names.
It's not as dry.
There you go. That's probably a better way to say it. The Lord can handle us talking about portions of His Word and saying, "Yeah, that wasn't the most exciting or interesting." But this is a section where maybe you didn't have as much, I don't know, excitement.
Yeah, there weren't as many maybe wow moments.
Yeah.
So
So
there might have been a bunch of head scratching moments for sure.
Right. Yeah, this is where you start asking some questions like, how does this relate to me? And Exodus 20 is, from last week's reading, the end of it, is the giving of the law, specifically the giving of the 10 words, the 10 commandments. Mm-hmm. And then in chapters 21 and following, you start getting more details into specific, more detailed laws. It's like the 10 commandments are 10 general laws that we need to order our lives around and reveal to us the heart of God for relationships to Him and to our fellow man. Then you have all these more detailed laws of specifics of this situation, here's what you're to do, or this situation, here's what you're to do, or don't do this specifically. And some people view many of these commandments that are going to be in here and also in Leviticus as really an expansion on the Ten Commandments, the Ten Commandments being more generic, this being more specific. So, for example, right there in chapter 21, about starting verse 12 and following, my headline in my scripture by the editors of the NIV say personal injuries. And then there's all these laws about what to do in regard to if you accidentally kill someone, here's what the punishment is.
Or if your animal kills someone.
Yeah.
Right.
So all this goes on to under how to love your neighbor well, right? And you can take most of these specifics and put them under one of the Ten Commandments, right? So thou shalt not steal. Well, then it talks about more specifically. So a lot of this is related to judgment and in terms of the legal system, how to deal with crimes or when the Ten Commandments are broken. So some people find this very compelling and interesting, and then to think about how our laws are today in our society. But it's different. Protection of property, chapter 22, social responsibility also, chapter 23, laws of justice and mercy, Sabbath laws. Now that leads us to an interesting question, is we as believers, do we keep the Sabbath or not? And across the spectrum of Christianity, there's a lot of different views on how we relate to the Sabbath laws from the Old Testament.
Right. What is for us to apply today, and what is not?
Yeah, Seventh-day Adventist.
Yeah.
They don't worship together on Sunday. They meet on Saturday because Saturday's the Sabbath, and they want to keep the Old Testament law in this way. And they would be an example of someone who falls under the umbrella of Christianity that is kind of on the extreme end of one spectrum in terms of trying to keep the laws from the Old Testament. Whereas most Christians do not think we necessarily have to keep these laws today, which is, of course, our position, which we can talk on more here in a few minutes. But chapter 24, the covenant confirmed. Chapter 25, offerings for the tabernacle, about the ark, the lampstand, the table. Getting those a little bit out of order. The tabernacle, altar of burnt offering, how to do burnt offerings. What the whole religious system of worship for them was supposed to look like.
Yeah, the ceremonial aspect of it. And I'll just say personally, to be just for myself, whenever we start getting into sections like that where it's describing, this portion of the tabernacle or this room or these curtains, that's where my eyes start to kind of glaze over. I'll say I was interested in the laws, but when I started getting to this section, I was like, okay, now, this is very much lost on me, and hopefully, someplace, in heaven, someone's going to show me what all these, and I'm gonna be like, oh man, that's so rich. But right now, I'm like, my eyes are glazing.
Yeah. Chapter 28, the priestly garments. So this gets into what the priests are supposed to wear. The breastpiece.
Yeah, all the gems.
How's this relate
to the names, the engraving of the stones, the turban, the clothes.
Consecration of the priest, chapter 29, altar of incense, chapter
Although
30.
I will say this, my Bibles, I'm doing a Bible study with my life group on Tuesdays, and we just went through Zechariah, and in one of the visions of Zechariah, you start hearing, this vision of Joshua and, the stone with 7 eyes with an engraving on it, and a lot of it was like, that sounds exactly what I'm reading here. So, again, not to say that, we've never said this before, but of course, there's going to be a lot of tying things in all over the Old Testament, and that's why a portion like this, where, as New Testament Christians, we read and go, oh, maybe this is dry, or maybe I'm kind of lost on this. It's very important for us to read it so we can understand other portions of Scripture and get a greater understanding of what's going on. So, Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're not interrupting at all. So, one of the things that I wanted to bring to this discussion very briefly, just to get it introduced for our listeners, is the idea that when we go through the Old Testament, we deal with all these laws. Inevitably, when you read the Old Testament, you have to ask the question, how does this relate to me today as a follower of Jesus Christ? Furthermore, we have the reality that Jesus said he instituted a new covenant. So you got to think about the covenants. There was covenants in the book of Genesis. This is what's referred to, this section of law giving is referred to by believers as the Mosaic covenant. And a covenant is an agreement. It's like a contract between two parties. And this is between God and us, these covenants, these agreements of how we're going to relate to each other and how we're going to live, these covenants. The new covenant is different from the old covenant. And as believers in the New Testament and in Jesus, we're living under the new covenant that Christ established in his blood.
Mm-hmm. We have
which
a new
is
contract that we're
fulfillment,
living under. Right.
Yeah, a fulfillment of the Old Testament covenant. But it puts us in a different position, and it causes us to not live exactly the same way under the exact same laws as the Hebrew people did in the Old Testament. But the question then becomes, how much?
What is the relationship?
What is the relationship? That's
Right.
correct. And Christians disagree over that.
Mm-hmm.
So, Stephen, you want to join us at this moment in the discussion and make a comment or two based on what you're hearing?
Yeah. So, I think another factor that maybe we could discuss a little bit, perhaps, is just the whole concept of Jesus being all through the Old Testament.
Yes.
And when he was talking with the two guys on the road to Emmaus after he had been resurrected, the Bible says he took the law, if I remember right, the law and the prophets, and showed himself. So that's another whole aspect of this whole thing is how does it relate to the picture of Christ as well? So
excellent.
But yeah.
And that's one of the comments I wanted to make. So you beat me to the punch, and I'm glad you did.
Mm-hmm.
Shows that we're on the same page with this. So here's just a couple of things I think would be wise for people who are reading the Old Testament maybe for the first time and trying to figure out, some of these laws are strange and obscure. I think about the law that says you're not to wear garments that are mixed fibers.
Right.
So 100% cotton, is that really more godly than 80% cotton, 20% polyester or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Or shaving of the beard, or shellfish, or
tattoos. Old Testament, there's a command there: do not pierce your skin and ink it.
Let me one up you. I believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong. I believe there is a verse in the Old Testament that talks about not bringing trees into your house and putting ornaments on them.
In Isaiah.
Y'all leave me alone.
I wonder how many people are going to hear that and be like, wait, what?
Right. So is it wrong for a Christian to get a tattoo because it says don't get a tattoo in the Old Testament law? These are questions that Christians deal with. Are we supposed to observe the Sabbath? Are we supposed to tithe? The word tithe means one out of 10. A tenth is what the word means. And so when Christians talk about tithing, giving 10% to God, giving 10% of their money to the local church or whatever, is that a law that God's expecting us to obey now, or is that Old Testament covenant? We're in the New Covenant now. We're not going to answer all those questions right now. It's a deep discussion, but I wanted to use this section because we're now entering into these detailed laws as just a chance to get the plane off the runway and put it in our discussion that will come in future episodes as well, that we'll be touching on this ongoing discussion of, does this relate to us and how do we relate to it?
Right. And to give freedom to our listeners and to anyone who's kind of new to this entire idea, that there are Christians that land on different sides of each one of these issues. Like, do we bring all of the laws of the Old Testament and the laws of the New Testament and live by those? Or, where do we only live by what the New Testament says and say, hey, the old contract is done, or some kind of combination or hybrid idea? There are people who live on different who live in different one of those areas, and we want to just have freedom to know that the application of those things, there might be some gray areas in terms of how somebody might live those out.
Yes, and of course we want to have we want to have respect for other believers who don't land the same way in terms of how they view the Old Testament, relate to it. But so if you're sitting there and you're wondering, well, what do I do with these Old Testament laws when I'm reading through? Do I have to obey them, keep all of them? Here's the general rule of thumb I think is very wise to live by, is if those laws bother you and you don't like them, then don't worry about it. I'm just kidding. Pick and choose the ones you like.
Someone's going to stop the video right there and be like, yes, we're done.
And just take the ones you want to use to win your argument. When you're arguing with another believer. I'm just kidding.
Right?
Yeah, let's just pick and choose what we want. Which, here's the truth. I think at times we do struggle with picking and choosing when it comes to this. I'm using that for humor, but I'm also saying we need to evaluate, make sure that we're being consistent.
Mm-hmm.
However we feel like is the right way to apply, which we need to seek the Lord as to what's the best way to relate to the Old Testament laws. But then let's be consistent with it. Because I do think that we are guilty at times of picking and choosing. We'll use an Old Testament law scripture to defend one of our points, where in another point we would say, well, that's Old Testament law. That doesn't apply to me anymore.
Right.
But then you just used it to try to put that on someone else. This is true of parents even. I mean, we could be guilty of this with our kids.
Yeah.
So you brought up something, Stephen, that I wanted to point out that I think is vital when we read the Old Testament law, is we are looking for Christ throughout the Old Testament, which his name is not there explicitly, but his spirit is there through the Old Testament. And the Old Testament was given to us all is shadows of the coming reality of Jesus. I picked one book off my shelf just to show. I'm not officially endorsing this book. I'm going to admit I have not read this book. It's one I picked up because I heard it was good to deal with this topic.
And it makes me look smart when I have more books on my bookshelf.
Exactly. No. So I have thumbed through it a little bit. I'm going to actually look through it more this week as we continue our study through the Old Testament, because it's one of those books I'm like, I need to delve more into that. It's called The Shadow of Christ in the Law of Moses. The book of Hebrews in the New Testament, which deals a lot with this topic of the New Covenant related to the Old Covenant and how much better the New Covenant is the point of the book of Christ is best. He's the best. He's better than the Old Testament. He's better than But we see the shadow of Jesus Christ through the whole Old Testament. We don't. In the New Testament, he's revealed. We see him for who he is. But his shadow is in the Old Testament. This is the shadow of Christ in the Law of Moses by Vern Poythress, where he deals with this topic. Look at the question on the back here. What does the Old Testament have to do with Jesus Christ? And his answer is everything. That's cool. So Jesus is in the Old Testament concealed and in the New Testament revealed. And that's true also of the law itself. So, all right,
Stephen, any kind of closing remarks you wanna you have for this section before we close up this part of the podcast?
Well, you know, talking about seeing Jesus, I was just thinking how it's easier to see him in certain aspects of the law. For example, it's so much easier to see him in the sacrificial system versus the candelabra. No, it's not what you call it, but all the tools and instruments in the temple. I was just thinking about a story where years ago I've only been to Israel once, but I was coming back from Israel on a plane, and I was sitting next to a young guy from Israel. He grew up there, just got out of the military, and he was sitting next to me, and we had a conversation about God, and he believed in God, just a typical Jewish guy, but he didn't believe in Jesus, didn't believe in the New Testament, didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. And so I just kind of tried to do what Jesus did of himself. Was I just went back to the Old Testament and tried to show him Jesus, but I did it only from one angle, and that was all the sacrifices that were made, which he strongly believed in. You know, how they used to, have all the sacrifices. So just that aspect of it is a little bit easier, but some other aspects, it's just harder to know, okay, how does Jesus fit into this picture? You know?
It's good.
But that aspect of it, at least, is one aspect that I think you can give an overall picture of, okay, Jesus fulfilled that. He was the perfect lamb that was sacrificed, so you don't have to do that anymore.
That's right.
Yeah, and the temple in the curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom, symbolizing that the sacrificial temple system was done.
The separation.
Yeah, it no longer have a need for this anymore because it was all pointing toward Jesus. Now that Jesus, the true sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, has been offered for our sins.
Once for all.
Once for all. No more need of this. It was all pointing toward that. Now that's been completed. So, and you were referring to the road to Emmaus over in Luke 24.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. It says in verse 27, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Jesus, preaching Jesus from the Old Testament.
I am a stranger in this land, but I won't be here long, so I might as well.
All
right, we're back from the break, and we have Stephen Adams on the phone with us from Harlem, Georgia. Actually, I guess you live in suburban Augusta, Georgia. Pastor of Legacy Church he planted a few years ago in Harlem, Georgia. And what's the website for Legacy Church, Stephen?
Yeah, it's just called mylegacychurch.org.
mylegacychurch.org. Excellent. Well, Stephen, we would love to hear you share your story of how you came to faith in Jesus Christ. Now, I know you were raised in a Christian home, godly parents who loved the Lord, and you had, 3 siblings, is that right? 4 siblings?
No, there were 5 of us.
4 siblings, so 5 of you.
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell us your story, Stephen.
Yeah, well, like you said, I have been blessed to grow up in a Christian home. My mom and dad just so loved the Lord, and we went to church, as they say, every time the door was open. And my dad was a dairy farmer. A lot of people thought he was a minister because he was just always talking about the Lord. But so growing up, we went to church, but my dad, he was just a genuine man who had a great relationship with God. Now, he was so far from perfect, but my dad would read his Bible constantly. I would walk by his bedroom sometimes at night, and he'd be laying in bed reading his Bible or reading perhaps a Christian biography. And he was always talking with his kids, talking with us about the Lord. I can remember so many times just sitting at the dinner table or something like that, and just him telling us Bible stories. Also, him telling us about great men and women of God that he would read about, and just always challenging us to live for God. But just to show you a little bit of how genuine it really was, my dad loved to sing and sing praises to the Lord. I never heard him sing anything other than just songs about the Lord. And but he could be on the backside of the pasture, working with the cows by himself or something like that, or working on a tractor. And I could walk back there to where he is by himself. And before I'd even get there, sometimes I could hear him singing. And, so he just genuinely had a focus on the Lord.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Both of your parents have gone on to glory, by the way.
Yeah, yes. My mama died, I want to say about 4 years ago, and then Daddy died about 2 years ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So godly heritage.
Yeah. Well,
that does not mean you're a Christian. You're not born a Christian. So
That's right. And that was part of the struggle years when I got to be about 10, 11 years old. Mm-hmm. Fell under deep conviction. I knew God was real. I mean, I never doubted that there was a God. I never doubted all the things about Jesus and his death on the cross and everything the Bible taught us about salvation. I just couldn't seem to take that step. Mm-hmm. And just holding out. And but there was a young man who was in our youth group. His dad was the pastor of the church where we attended in Sandersville. Actually, the church was called Sisters Baptist Church.
Sisters.
And Sisters Baptist Church.
Was that part of the community, or what's the story behind that name?
There's a story behind it that started in the 1700s, but I could tell that later.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what it was called. Yes. But his name was Andy, and Andy had a burden for me to come to know the Lord. He was a couple of years older than me. He was about 13 or 14 at the time. I was about 10 or 11. And I would go to church, and literally, I would, I could be sitting there during the invitation after the pastor has preached, and I could hear during a prayer to come forward, I could hear Andy whispering my name, and I would be embarrassed, and I'd look over at him, warning him to, be quiet. And he's trying to whisper, Stephen, how about now? Stephen, don't you want to? And I'd look over at him embarrassed, and there'd be a tear just running down his face. I'm sorry to get choked up just even telling it, but he told me years later. We were talking. This was probably when we were both in our late 20s, and he said back during those years he was so burdened for me. He said he made a pact with God that he wouldn't stop praying for me until I gave my life to Christ. And after he finished college, he hooked up with a ministry called Campus Crusade for Christ, and he still works for them today. So lives out in Colorado.
13 years old and burdened for another person's soul like that. That's phenomenal.
So I'm assuming you got saved when you were 11?
No.
How long did he have to follow through on that pact?
I'm just kidding. Yeah. No. He. Let's see. It was probably 6 months into it that I walked forward one Sunday night, and I'm telling you, when his dad was down front like most pastors would that did it this way, and I gave my life to Christ with his dad praying for me on my knees there in front of the church. And but I remember standing up, and when I made eye contact with Andy, I mean, we both just wept, And but yeah, it was on a Sunday night when I was about 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
At Sisters Baptist Church.
At Sisters
in Sandersville, Georgia.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you are following Jesus as a young man, then becoming a teenager.
Yeah. So this is a little bit of my testimony that I sometimes share.
Mm-hmm.
Had a few things that have happened. So got into my high school. Well, first let me back up. When I was in the 6th grade, growing up on the farm, one afternoon we were doing what's called grinding feed. We had what's called a feed grinder, and it would grind food for our cattle. And it's kind of a little bit hard to explain because when I tell this, some people think, that I fell over into the machine, which did not happen. But the outside of the machine had several cogs and different things that turned. And most of the machines had a shield over this part of the instrument. and the feed grinder hooks up to a tractor with a what's called a PTO shaft that turns, and that turns the machine. So our machine did not have a shield over this portion that was turning on the outside, and I got too close to it, and it grabbed my jacket and snatched me over into the part that was turning. I don't remember anything other than standing there, and then it was like just waking up from a sleep. I just woke up on the ground, and my jacket, my football jersey that I had on at the time I had no shirt on. It was all ripped to shreds. I was gushing blood. The guy that worked for my dad at the time, one of the guys that worked for him on the farm, was actually a minister, and he put me in the back of his car, rushed me to the hospital. He said later, I would have given about 2 cents for your life. He said, because to me, you were dead. He said, there's no way this young man is going to survive this.
Wow.
And
how old were you, Stephen?
So I was about, I want to say about 10, 11 years old. So this wasn't long after my salvation experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so my dad, who was the dairy farmer, and his brother, who was also a dairy farmer, were out of town on a business trip. They had come back into town and were sitting at a local restaurant that, if your listeners know Sandersville, everybody's going to know this restaurant. But it was called the Dairy Lane, kind of like a Dairy Queen. But they were sitting in there when somebody came in and told them that their son had been in an accident involving the feed grinder. And they didn't know if I was dead or alive. They didn't know anything about my condition. And so my uncle and my dad sitting there, Daddy says that he just assumed that I was not alive, but assumed that if I was alive, that was probably in unbearable pain.
Mm-hmm.
So he said they prayed before they left, And he said, I just told the Lord, you've given me a son, and I've given him back to you. And if you've chosen to take him, I'm going to accept that. But he said, he just prayed that the Lord would not allow me to be in any pain if I was alive. And so I can remember just there on the operating table, my dad walking in, and I was conscious, wasn't in any pain, and him asking me, "Son, you in any pain?" And I said, "No." And really, through that whole experience, there was not any real tremendous pain to speak of. And I really think the Lord honored my dad's request. I don't have any scars on my body, from that.
Wow.
Was it internal injuries?
No,
What was the
mostly
injury with the blood, gushing blood, and all that?
Yeah, there was part of it was a head injury. My head was very swollen from getting hit. Had some other cuts around my face, not much there, but really more around my chest, where especially the bar that was turning left a deep scar there across my chest. But then I had a lot of scarred up areas around my arms. Even taking my blood pressure, they had to hold off doing that at times just because of the sores that were there.
Wow.
So
the Lord wasn't through with you on earth, obviously.
Yeah. So from there, I tell how, I got into high school, and during those years, I was just kind of, well, let me back up a little bit. When I was in the 11th grade, there was something that happened. And me and 3 other people were coming back from Milledgeville to Sandersville, which is our hometown. We had been water skiing at the lake in Milledgeville. So we were coming back, and our truck, it was kind of a rainy afternoon, and the truck started hydroplaning. So we had a wreck. The truck flipped end over end after hitting a little drainage pipe on the side of the road. So it threw, as the truck was flipping, it threw me and my brother and another guy, our neighbor, who was in the truck. My first cousin was driving. He was the only one that didn't get thrown out of the back window. And so it threw 3 of us out of the back window as it was flipping. And what's amazing is my parents, there again, were at home. They just began to sense that something was wrong, and God was impressing on them to pray for their children. So they had gotten on their knees, were praying for us, and then they got a call to come to the hospital. There'd been a wreck. And what's amazing is there was a man who lived in a trailer out in the field who was standing on his porch. It was the only house or anywhere around this area. He saw it happen. He said, I saw bodies just flying everywhere. He just happened to work for the ambulance department, EMT. But anyhow, so he called, got there pretty quickly. But I got up on one side of the truck. My brother, who landed on a totally different side of the truck, got up. We were okay. My brother had a little scratch on his back that required a few stitches. Our neighbor, who was thrown the furthest, he was okay. He had a little bit of a fracture. Had to spend one night in the hospital, but he was okay. But here's the amazing part. So when the truck quit flipping, it landed on all fours. But what's amazing is the back window was lying in the bed of the truck, as if, to me, I think about it this way. It's as if an angel, as the truck was flipping, just guided us, took that window, just kind of set it back there, and it's like the hand of the Lord was just on us. Is all I can say. He just protected us that afternoon. God had a plan. God had a purpose.
Right.
And, He's going to fulfill it.
Live long enough. Seems like some people have near-death experiences, but for you to have those 2 accidents prior to being out of high school is significant, especially in light of the nature of those accidents. This wasn't necessarily stupidity on your part. A lot of kids do stupid things that cause. I mean, obviously, you probably shouldn't have got too close to the feed grinder, but
exactly.
I don't know all the circumstances surrounding you. You shared a lot of it there, but maybe you should have been driving a little slower or whatever. But it wasn't, like you were putting yourself extremely risky behavior on your part or anything like that.
Yeah, we really wasn't, because the thing about that stretch of highway is there's chalk mines, or the county I grew up in, Washington County, is the kale and capital of the world, which is the technical term for chalk. But when that chalk gets on the highway and it rains a little bit, it's like a slick film that just covers it. And so that was a part of it. We probably wasn't going about 55 miles an hour, but yeah, we started hydroplaning.
Not to say that you are driving recklessly, but yeah, and I've heard that many times, where just at the very beginning of rain is the worst, because it's got all that slick still, and it's just kind of getting it all wet. And I know I studied to be an EMT for a little bit, and I know that the car accidents where a car spins like that, that's going to be the most deadly, where you'll find the most deaths is any kind of spin, whether it be impact or T-bone or whatever. It's when a car spins, that's where you're going to find the most. Mm-hmm. And in this case, you're saying every single person, was able to stand up and walk away from that one perfectly fine. Well, besides a few minor injuries.
Yeah.
So Steve, before we
the mystery to me is that, knowing that the car had flipped, for me to land on one side and my brother to land on the opposite side, and then our neighbor who landed in actually a different direction, you think, well, the safest thing would be for God to have us all land on one side, so just miss us all. But it's like, how did it not hit one of us?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, before we take a short break, Stephen, I do want to ask you this question, this detail about, do you remember flying through the air?
I don't. I can remember sliding into the ditch, but that was pretty much it.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Fascinating. All right. Let's take a short break and be back to hear more Stephen's story.
So Lord, show me more. Show me more of you.
All right, Stephen. So we are back from that break, and we just heard some very miraculous stories of how God was so gracious in protecting you in these, which could have been life-ending tragedies. And yet His grace has been over you. He's protecting you. We love this truth and this idea that God has a plan for us, and He's protecting you from these big accidents. What was the next thing that happened in your testimony here for this, maybe to acting out this idea of this God's having this plan for you?
Yeah, well, you'd think that from that point on, I'm just really on fire for God. But at that point, as I started into my high school years, really, it was really just hills and valleys for me spiritually. Mm-hmm. You go to a youth camp, you get on fire for God, that lasts for a little while, and then you're just like every other kid. At the time, you're telling dirty jokes, and you're not just living for God until you go to another youth camp. So I would say during these years, I would be what's called a very lukewarm Christian. Mm-hmm. And so I was that way through high school. Most people would say, I was a good guy, but I was very lukewarm. I knew that in my heart. Mm-hmm. And then I finished high school, started my first year in college. And it was during that time that I was going to the local bars in the college town of Milledgeville. Sandersville, where I grew up, was a dry county, so they didn't have bars. And I was just out of high school, and really this started while I was in high school. I would go to these clubs with my first cousins, who most of them were older than me and were old enough to get in. And so I would, they'd let me try to go in first, and if I got in, then they'd come on in, and if I didn't get in, then we just go somewhere else and try it.
Right, and go on to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just living a very lukewarm life. And I justified it in my own mind with these thoughts. I don't drink, which I didn't. I didn't drink alcohol. I didn't have premarital sex. Uh, Things that really, truly, by the grace of God, that I didn't participate in. So I justified in my mind. But the bottom line is, I was still just wanting to fit in with everybody. I was still a very lukewarm Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And so God began to convict me. And so in 1986, I just decided, you know what? I can't keep riding the fence. I need to make up my mind. Am I going to live for God or not? And so I made a New Year's resolution that year that I wanted to at least spend 1 year just being on fire for God. And I decided that I wasn't going to tell anybody. This was just going to be between me and God. Because here was my thought. If I can't carry it out, and if I don't fulfill my end of the deal, then at least nobody knows about it, and I haven't hurt not only my reputation,
Mm-hmm.
but God's reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was going to keep it a secret. But I found out when you make a commitment to God, a lot of times God will test you on it because He doesn't want it to be a private thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad, backing up a little bit, he had gone out of the dairy business and had gone into the insurance business. And we moved from Sandersville to Milledgeville. And now at this point, my dad has an insurance office downtown Milledgeville. And so I'm in my first year of college. I'm walking to my dad's office downtown. I've already made this New Year's resolution. But this man walks up to me on the streets of Milledgeville with a camera and a notepad. And he says, "Excuse me, I'm from the newspaper." He says, "We're taking a little survey." He said, "Have you made any New Year's resolutions?" And when he asked me, it was one of these times where I knew God was speaking to me, not in an audible voice, but I knew God was saying, if you meant that commitment that you made to me, then you tell Him. But if you're ashamed of it, then don't tell Him. And immediately I thought of the Bible verse where Jesus said, if any man's ashamed of me before men, one day I'm going to be ashamed of him before my Father in heaven. And so
Right.
I knew in my heart I had to tell him. But I asked the man, I said, let me ask you this. Is this going to be in the paper? He said, well, I don't know. He said, we just kind of pick them randomly. It may or it may not be.
Uh-huh.
But in my heart, I knew God was saying, it's going to be in the paper.
Oh, you knew. He was telling you.
Yeah. And he said, again, if you mean it, you tell him. But if you don't mean it, then don't tell him. And so I told him. He looks at me funny, writes it down, takes my picture, and walks off. Well, the newspaper would come out every Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's the thing. I didn't go to see if it was in the paper. I went to see what it said. I knew it was going to be in the paper.
Right.
Yeah. Here's what I didn't know. I didn't know it was going to be on the front page.
Whoa.
Yeah. That year, they had this column about New Year's resolutions. It was the only thing on the front page was 3 pictures, and it was 3 people who had been a part of all these New Year's resolutions that they took. Well, mine was right in the middle of my picture.
Wow.
On the front page.
And you were what, 18, 19 years old?
I was about 19 at the time. Yeah.
Oh,
Just turned 19.
Talk about making your proclamation public.
Yes.
I don't know if you can make it more public than that, man.
And that was the beginning. I mean, that was the turnaround for me for just understanding that God was saying, look, I need you to be all in or make up your mind. You for me or you against me. You know which will. I don't want you riding the fence.
Right.
Get on or get off. What you going to do? Kind of thought.
Right.
And that was the beginning of no looking back. Because in my mind, when I would think about being called into ministry, and Brad, I don't know if you guys had this, but to me, it was a very boring life. No girls to date. I'll be a goody two shoes. I've got to dress with these strange clothes all the time. Wear a suit and tie everywhere you go. And but that was the beginning of God speaking to my heart to say, well, even if it does mean that, follow my calling. Just whatever it takes, any cost, follow me. And of course, after I made that decision to be all in, God showed me that it was not anything like what I thought it would be anyhow. It's a great life. And, there are godly girls out there too that and just, wonderful friends. So that was kind of the beginning of knowing that God was calling me in the ministry, because leading up to the New Year's resolution, it wasn't a resolution to surrender to the ministry. It was just a resolution in my own heart to say, I just want to do whatever He wants me to do. I want my yes to be on the table. And it was out of that God began to slowly give me the understanding that, yes, He was calling me in the ministry.
I love that. I love this whole idea of, you in your heart, you're making this secret commitment to the Lord, and almost immediately the Lord says, well, let me put this secret commitment to the test. I'm going to bring these things that you've put into the closet. I'm going to put it out in front of everybody. I like it.
That's right.
And as you're telling your story, Stephen, I'm hearing this, and you're telling it from the mid-1980s perspective, which back then, that was the phrase we used, called into the ministry, as if it's a separate thing from being a follower of Jesus. Now, as we've matured, we recognize the Word actually teaches that every Christian is called into the ministry. And it's just, you were specifically talking about vocational pastoral ministry. And that was what we understood in the ministry. It was just poor language that we used back then. We didn't know any better.
And I want to add something to that, because I'm going to tie something from what you just said to what you said in the very beginning. You said everybody thought that your dad was a minister.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of the way he lived and the way that he walked.
And talked about the Lord
and
so
talked
much.
about the Lord. And they thought that he was a minister. And in fact, and I thought about it when you said it, was like, but he was. He was a minister. He may not have been vocational. He may have been this been his full-time job, but in every way, I think the Lord means for us to be ministers of Christ. Your father was.
Yes.
And now you've done the same thing.
Yeah. Well, what you guys are saying is so good and so true. That today we think of somebody that is a minister, and they're the ones that are sold out for Christ. But that should be normal Christianity.
That is exactly right.
That's exactly what I was going to say. There's a Chinese pastor who wrote a book called The Normal Christian Life. His name is Watchman Nee. And that's really, the normal Christian life is understanding we are all in the ministry. Your dad was living the normal Christian life. Sad to say, in America, when we were growing up, that wasn't necessarily the reality, because there was so much cultural Christianity. I'm saved, I'm headed to heaven.
Yeah.
But the serious following of Jesus Christ is up to pastors, missionaries, etc. Now we realize, of course, that's untrue. The Bible actually teaches that all believers are to be serious followers of Jesus Christ, and to be representing Him, and to be talking about Him frequently, etc. So, and we're all in the ministry. Ephesians chapter 4. Pastors, what you and I do, Stephen, as vocational pastors of churches, our job is to equip the saints, that is all Christians, for ministry, for the ministry. So once you become a Christian, you're in the ministry. You may not be a pastor, you may not be a missionary, you may be flipping burgers at McDonald's, you may be a salesperson, an insurance agent, a dairy farmer, a computer guy, whatever.
Yeah, but you are a minister of Christ in those arenas.
That's exactly
whatever
right.
it is.
Yeah, we're all in the ministry as believers.
Right.
So I tell young people today who are struggling with, what is God's will for their lives? Where's He taking them? Well, the same is true for everybody, in the sense that the first step is just a complete surrender. Put your yes on the table.
Yeah.
God, I'll do whatever, and then He'll begin to make it clear. Sometimes it's an immediate, but sometimes it's a process, and to show you exactly what He's leading you to do. But all of us, with our yes on the table, are called to be ministers. Yeah, you're exactly right.
That's good. All right, brother. Great having you on here, and
great being here.
We appreciate it, and we'll just wrap up the show now with that. And it's been great having Stephen Adams on here. Read for next week. Next week's episode, it'll be Exodus chapters 31 through 40.
You got it.
And we'll see you then. God bless.
Take care.